today we're in Psalm chapter 14, and because there's just a few verses, I want to read the Psalm. One of the interesting things as you praying through the Psalms and reading the Psalms, these Hebrew hymns that were set to song in worship, and give us, I think, a good outline in our prayers. Uh, the interesting thing to me as we're pursuing this journey is that by going through the order of the Psalms, we're touching on subjects sometimes that we probably wouldn't. And in Psalm chapter 14, it's a challenging psalm, especially in the society in which we live today. In Psalm chapter 14, David said, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, and they have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The Lord," he says, "looketh down from heaven upon the children of men." And what God is looking for is to see if there are any who do understand and that they seek the Lord. In verse number 3, going on to describe the fool further, he says, "They are all gone aside. They are all together become vile or filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one." In verse number 4, "Have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge or understanding? And who eat up my people as they eat bread, and they do not, of course, call upon the name of the Lord." In verse number 5, "They are they who are in great fear, for God is the generation of the righteous." And at number 6, he says, "Ye have shamed the counsel of the poor, because the Lord is his refuge. Oh, that the salvation of Israel were to come out of Zion. When the Lord bringeth back the captivity," and this is not referring to the exile, but those who are in other kind of captivity, "and that Jacob will rejoice and Israel will be glad." So let's look at verse number 1, especially today. Some of you may remember the late Richard Dawkins, who was a renowned scientist, probably the most popular scientist in our generation. It's interesting, I don't know if that's really the word I want to use, but he once said that religion and belief in God is like a virus that you catch from people. And he goes on to say it's a dangerous thing and it ought to be eliminated from society. What a statement. I was thinking that if you did indeed eliminate God from society, you're digging a pit. I mean, the major problem in our culture today is not economics, but that God is being removed from society, from our schools, from Congress, from about everything. And of course, the leaders in America don't see that as a major problem. Now, as I think about the fool here, there's all kind of fools. There are intellectual fools. You can have a mind that is extremely intelligent and brilliant and yet be a fool. And there are fools that are just, I would say, just assume fools. They just assume there's no God. They did not research or investigate, or try to figure out in any way if there is a God. They're just living life as if there's no God at all. And then there's more of an aggressive atheist. There are atheistic organizations and societies that are aggressively trying to remove God from society, and there's sometimes animosity in that. It is their goal to eliminate, as Dawkins had said, God from society. And then I think there are men who are dishonest about God. That is, Paul talks about in Romans 1 about those who suppress the truth. They know what the truth is, but they suppress it because of darkness. And what I mean by that is in John chapter 3 and verse 19 and 20, Jesus said that men, you see, love darkness. That's why they refuse the light. And so sometimes people just don't want to know what the truth is, or they suppress the truth because they love darkness. And that's people, there's many like that, don't want to live life as if there's no God. They don't want moral restraints. Those are too constraining. Live life without any boundaries. And if I were just to ask you from a secular point of view today, how is that working? Well, it's not working very good, as we can see all the troubles that we have today in our society. So there's all kind of forms of atheism, and I will say this: there are people who I'm going to call it who protest or defy God because of ignorance. And what I mean by that is they're wrestling with God. I think they wrestle with the existence of God in an honest way as they look at life and they see all the things that are going on in life, all the terrible things, all kinds of things that it's just hard to understand, from suffering to whatever you want to throw in there. And they can't figure out, how can there be a God who allows so many things to happen? That's what I mean by people being honest about it. They can't seem to get things together there on how God can be with all the awful things that go on in life. And I would just say this for the moment. This world isn't paradise. This isn't the Garden of Eden. We live in a fallen world. There are terrible things that do happen. There are just so many things. And I just would say this, regardless of the problem there, and by the way, it's more of a problem for the believer sometimes than it is for the unbeliever, because the unbeliever is just going to remove God out of society, and they're just going to just come down to the conclusion, well, that's just the way life it is. You don't wrestle with that kind of a problem unless you truly believe in God. And the question is, how could God allow all this to happen? So I think there are people who honestly wrestle with the existence of God. And I would just say this for the moment today, because we just really can't get into this. That does not remove the fact that there is a God, and there's more evidence than you could ever dream of to substantiate that. But let's move on here to Psalm 14 and 1, because I want you to see what David is really saying here. As we look in verse number 1, the fool, and he uses a very strong word for fool, and he uses a Hebrew word, nabal, and the idea there is this isn't an intellectual fool. He's not talking about a simpleton. What he's really talking about is a person who is a moral fool. That is, he's corrupt, and it's not just that he lives without God. If you were to look at the Hebrew literally, it says the fool has said in his heart, no God. Not that there is no God, but no God. Have you ever experienced this? Someone calls up on the telephone and asks for your brother Bill or your sister Sue, and this is someone calling on the phone, and you look over there and they shake their head. They don't want to talk to them. Or how about this? Some of you might remember, the old traveling salesman knocking on the door, and you go out there and the first thing you say is, I don't want it, and you slam the door in his face. Or someone asks for money and you say, no mas, no money, no money. And so it's like a person that just doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want anything to do with it. It's not just an intellectual thing. You say, here's a person that does not want anything to do with God. Slam the door on his face, hang up the phone, and deny, that Bill was there. That's what's going on here. The fool says, no God, I don't want God in my life. I don't want to think about him. I just want to live my life on my own. I'm independent from God. So you see, the problem here isn't someone that's wrestling with the existence of God, or it's not a person, you see, who doesn't believe in God because of some of the things that we just said. This fellow here is a moral fool. It's a strong word. And what he wants is he doesn't want anything to do with God. He doesn't want any restraints in life. He's going to live his life. He's not denying. Here's what I'm trying to say. He does not deny there's a God. He just doesn't want God. And so he wants God to completely stay out of my life. Have you ever talked to somebody like that? I mean, they don't want to hear what you have to say. They're closed-minded. They get angry at you. They get upset with you. They're intolerant with you because they don't want anything to do with what you're talking about. And that's the idea here. This fool here has slammed the door on God, and it's not that he denies the existence of God, but as far as life goes, he's going to live without God. So the fool says in his heart, no God. I do not want God, no God. Now, he goes on to describe these people, and because you see, this is what I meant by digging a pit. Once you move God out of life and remove him from society, and you can see today a lot of the moral foundations that we grew up with are being completely eliminated. This is going to happen. You're going to see a descent in society, and that's why he goes to say they are corrupt. By the way, the word corrupt means to sour or decay. You know what happened the other day? I got myself a nice bowl of cereal, Raisin Bran Flake. I really like that. And I reached into the refrigerator and I poured milk on it. And then I looked at the milk and it was just bubbling over and all kind of kernel stiff stuff in it. I don't know if you've ever done this by mistake, but took a swig of something that was sour. What an awful taste. The word corrupt means to sour or to rotten. Something rots, They sometimes even use a double body. So it's a terrible, terrible thing. It's something that's repugnant to us. It's just not evil stuff, but it's repugnant. When something is corrupt, there's an awful odor to it. It doesn't taste good. It's a bad thing. And that's what he's saying here. Once you take God and you say no God, you're going to see a path that's going to descend down the mountainside. So what he's going on to say is, there was none that doeth God. Now watch it here. In verse 3 and 4, God is looking down from heaven, and he's looking down intently to see if there's anybody down there that does righteousness. You're probably familiar with these verses because when Paul quotes those in Romans chapter 3, and so I'm just going to read it for a moment. The Lord looks down from heaven to see if there's any who do understand, that is, understand him, understand his word, and understands what life is all about. And what he does is he finds nobody. What a sad commentary on the creation of the creator of God. And then he goes on to say they've all gone aside, they're all filthy, there's none, no one righteous. That's exactly what Paul said in Romans 3. There are none righteous, no, not one. Again, think about it for a moment. How tragic is that? And Paul would go further to say that all of us have fallen short of the glory of God. Now, I want you to understand something in the next few verses, and then I'm going to let you go. Those first several verses are just a plate on humanity, aren't they? I mean, it's just a sad commentary. That when we turn from God, how things get awful, awful bad, and it don't take long. And though he begins to challenge us, you see, about that turning back to God, but in this process, you'll see that the unrighteous persecute the righteous. You ever wonder why? Here's the thing. Why is it that some people just hate righteousness and hate God and hate the people of God and hate the churches of God? Why do they do that? Because you see, they don't like being told that what's going on is wrong and it's not the right thing to do. Anybody that's doing wrong don't like to hear what's wrong. I know that in my preaching, nobody gets upset about something unless they're doing it. And so what he's talking about, you notice that what Jesus says, they hated light because they loved darkness. They don't like to hear it. They get mad at you. They get angry. They get upset because they don't want to hear when they're doing something wrong. And by the way, if you remember what in the reading, what the writer said, there's certain dread, isn't there? I don't know if there's something innate about this that even those who try to deny God really can't in reality deny him. I mean, deep down in their soul, it's hard to deny God, but it really is. It's just hard. Even though we live in a secular age, it's really hard ultimately to deny God. I was reading a philosopher who, by the way, was a critic of Christianity or of God, and this is what he said. I thought it was rather interesting. He said, "There is no God, but it is wise to pray to him from time to time." How about that? I mean, think about it. Here's a man that denies God, and yet he says, it might be a good thing to pray to him from time to time. And that's the truth, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, you cannot deny him. And I think that those who do, deep down in their soul, because I think there's something innate in us that no matter how much we try to cover it up and how much we pretend that there isn't, I think that there's something there that tells us that there is a God, and we have to account to God. And I think that's where that dread comes from. Ultimately, you see, every man in life has to face death, and every man ultimately will stand before God. Now, even though the righteous are being costed by the unrighteous, and you're kind of seeing that by aggressive, evil people. You're seeing people, you see, that want to eliminate God from society. But I think ultimately what you see in the Psalm on a positive note, God's going to be with the righteous. David says he's our refuge. He's our place of safety. And ultimately, no matter how dark the days are, you must remember in the end that you will be victorious if you are on God's side. And that's the psalm today. There's a lot to say there, isn't there? But there's a lot to think about too. So we'll be looking tomorrow at Psalm number 15. That's a great psalm, and it's probably the psalm you're very familiar with. But I'll see you tomorrow.